The Vikings were a seafaring people from the Scandinavian region who flourished from the late 8th to 11th century. Known for their skilled navigation and bold exploration, the Vikings ventured far and wide, leaving their mark across Europe through trade, raiding, and settlement. They were a fearsome force, renowned for their naval prowess and warrior culture. On the other hand, the Wends were a Slavic people who inhabited territories in present-day northern and eastern Germany, as well as parts of Poland and Denmark. The Wends had a distinct culture and were organized into various tribes and kingdoms. They were known for their resilience, military strength, and their ability to defend their lands from external threats. When the Vikings encountered the Wends during their voyages, they faced a formidable opponent. The Wends possessed a strong military, with skilled warriors and effective tactics. They built fortified settlements and employed defensive strategies to protect their territories. Furthermore, the Wends had a well-developed navy and seafaring abilities, posing a threat to Viking trade routes and maritime dominance. Culturally, the Vikings and Wends were quite different. They spoke different languages and had distinct religious beliefs and practices. Oftentimes, differences were equated to the uniqueness of each and every one. But to the Vikings, these differences are taking effect on a different note, and somehow it instills fear? A historical connection. The Wends, also known as the Slavic people, occupied a geographic area encompassing present-day northern and eastern Germany, as well as parts of Poland and Denmark. Their territory extended along the southern Baltic Sea coast, including the islands of Rügen and Usedom. The Wends inhabited a diverse land of marshes, forests, and rivers, which provided them with natural defenses and resources. This strategic location allowed them to control key trade routes and maintain a strong presence in the region. During the Viking Age, which spanned from the 8th to the 11th century, the Vikings embarked on extensive expeditions of exploration, raiding, and settlement. Their voyages took them across vast distances, from their Scandinavian homelands to regions such as England, Scotland, Ireland, Iceland, and Greenland, and even as far as North America. The Vikings were driven by a desire for wealth, new land, and adventure. Their expansion was facilitated by their advanced shipbuilding techniques, navigational skills, and military prowess. As the Vikings ventured further afield, they inevitably came into contact with the Wends. The proximity of the Wendish territories to the Scandinavian region made them a potential target for Viking raids and expansion. The Viking expeditions brought them face to face with the Wends' formidable military forces and established settlements. The encounters between the Vikings and Wends ranged from violent conflicts to peaceful interactions through trade and diplomacy. These interactions played a significant role in shaping the dynamics and power struggles of the time. Reasons for Viking fear. The Wends' military strength was a significant factor that instilled fear in the Vikings. The Wends were known for their skilled warriors and effective military tactics. They possessed extensive training and experience in combat, making them formidable adversaries on the battlefield. Their knowledge of the local terrain and ability to adapt to various combat situations gave them an advantage over the Vikings. Additionally, the Wends constructed fortified settlements, often located in strategic positions, which provided them with strong defensive advantages. These fortified structures, such as ramparts and strongholds, made it challenging for the Vikings to penetrate Wendish territories and posed a significant threat to their raiding expeditions. The Wends' naval power also contributed to the Vikings' fear. The Wendish people had a well-developed navy and seafaring abilities. They possessed advanced shipbuilding techniques and were skilled in navigating the treacherous waters of the Baltic Sea. This naval strength enabled the Wends to challenge the Vikings' dominance in maritime activities, including trade and exploration. The Wendish ships posed a direct threat to the Viking trade routes, as they were capable of intercepting Viking vessels and disrupting their commercial activities. The Wends' naval power not only restricted the Vikings' access to valuable resources, but also limited their ability to expand their influence in the region. Cultural differences played a role in intensifying the Viking fear of the Wends. The Vikings and Wends belonged to distinct cultural and linguistic groups. The language barrier created challenges in communication and understanding between the two groups, leading to misunderstandings and potential hostilities. Moreover, the Vikings and the Wends held different religious beliefs and practices. The Vikings were predominantly pagan, following Norse mythology, while the Wends practiced Slavic pagan rituals. These religious disparities further fueled the sense of unfamiliarity and mistrust between the two groups, amplifying the Vikings' fear of the Wends' unknown customs and rituals. Examples of these cultural differences can be seen in historical accounts of Viking expeditions into the Wendish territories. The lack of understanding of each other's languages and cultural practices often led to misunderstandings, conflicts, and violence. The clash of religious beliefs and rituals also heightened tensions between the Vikings and the Wends, as they viewed each other's practices as strange or even sacrilegious. These cultural disparities deepen the sense of fear and uncertainty that the Vikings experienced when encountering the Wends. Viking-Wend conflicts. Viking-Wend conflicts were characterized by raiding, plundering, and defensive encounters that shaped the relationship between these two groups. The Vikings were driven by the pursuit of riches, and the Wendish lands offered attractive targets for their pillaging expeditions. The Wends possessed valuable resources such as agricultural produce, livestock, and precious metals, which enticed the Vikings to launch raids in search of plunder. These raids were not only motivated by material gain, but also served to establish Viking dominance and intimidate the local populations. When the Vikings ventured into Wendish territories, they encountered strong resistance from the Wends. The Wends were fiercely protective of their lands and their way of life. They organized themselves into cohesive defensive forces to repel the Viking invasions. The Wendish warriors employed various military tactics and strategies, using their knowledge of the local terrain to their advantage. These defensive encounters often resulted in intense battles, with both sides engaged in fierce combat. Furthermore, there were instances where the Wends achieved victories and successfully defended their territories against Viking incursions. For example, the Battle of Rügen in 955 AD saw the Wendish forces, led by Prince Imstable, defeat a large Danish Viking fleet. This victory not only demonstrated the Wendish military prowess, but also served as a significant setback for Viking expansion in the region. The Viking-Wend conflicts were not one-sided, and the Wends proved to be formidable opponents for the Vikings. The clashes between the two groups were marked by intense struggles for control over territories and resources. These conflicts played a role in shaping the power dynamics in the region and had a lasting impact on both the Vikings and the Wends. Impact on Viking expansion. The Viking-Wend conflicts had a profound impact on the Vikings' expansion efforts, significantly affecting their resources, military strength, and trade networks. One of the key impacts was the diversion of Viking resources. The clashes with the Wends resulted in losses for the Vikings in battles. The Wends, with their formidable military strength and fortified settlements, posed a formidable challenge to the Vikings. These defeats depleted Viking forces, resulting in the decreased ability to sustain their campaigns and expand their territories. The need to defend their existing lands and territories against Wendish attacks forced the Vikings to redirect their resources towards defense rather than further expansion. As a result, opportunities for Viking exploration and conquest of new lands were limited. The conflicts also caused significant disruptions in trade. The Wends controlled strategic locations along key trade routes in the Baltic Sea region. This led to intense competition between the Vikings and the Wends for control over these routes. The Vikings relied heavily on trade for economic prosperity and the acquisition of valuable resources. The presence of the Wends, with their well-developed navy and seafaring abilities, threatened Viking trade activities. They intercepted Viking vessels, raided trading expeditions, and disrupted the flow of goods and resources. This resulted in increased risks, costs, and obstacles for Viking traders, affecting their economic growth and diminishing their influence in the region. In conclusion, the Vikings' fear of the Wends were driven by the Wends' military strength, naval power, and cultural differences. The Wends' formidable warriors, effective military tactics, and fortified settlements made them formidable opponents for the Vikings. Their well-developed navy and seafaring abilities challenged Viking trade routes and maritime dominance. Cultural disparities and unfamiliarity further contributed to the fear and mistrust between the Vikings and Wends. The impact of the Viking-Wend conflicts on Viking expansion was also significant. The diversion of Viking resources towards defense limited opportunities for further expansion. Losses in battles against the Wends weakened Viking military strength and hindered their ability to explore and conquer new territories. The competition for control of trade routes and disruptions in trade networks impacted Viking traders, impeding their economic activities and diminishing their influence in the region. That's it for today's video. If you learned something new, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more history in minutes.